Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Our tradition is to go around the room and say our names. My name is Grisha.
Greg. My name is Henry.
Stephen.
Jerry.
My name is Jeff.
Jack.
My name is Ray.
Kevin.
I'm Brad.
George.
Ron.
I'm Richard.
I'm Jim.
My name is Cass.
I'm Tony.
I'm Mike.
So I'd like to introduce our teacher for today. Prasadachitta was ordained into the Triratna Buddhist Order in 2011, and he became the chair of the San Francisco Buddhist Center, where we are today, in April of 2022. He was born on a back-to-the-land commune in rural Northern California, and that background has inspired engagement with others in building the San Francisco Buddhist Center's rural meditation center called Dharmadhara. He also helped to establish a community of sangha members who support retreats there. He supports himself as a documentary filmmaker and photographer, but his real life's work is training others who want to practice Buddhism within the Triratna Buddhist Community. And turn it over to you, Prasadachitta.
Thank you, Grisha. Wonderful to be here with all of you. This is a community I've enjoyed periodically over the years, many years. And I appreciate a lot of the teachings that I've received in this room with your group. And it informs, my contemplation of what it is that I will be, sharing here this evening. The cumulative memory that I have practicing here with you, listening to different teachers here in this group. So, so I have a vague idea of what I would like to convey. And it really is on the basis of the knowledge of a group of people that have been, digesting a lot of really amazing Dharma teachings that I'm aware of. And then thinking about, what am I going to share today? 20 some odd years ago, I realized I was a Buddhist. That isn't how it is for everybody, but that was how it was for me. I had been in Thailand and bought a little Buddha statue. And when I was in Thailand, I got to know a lot of monks, mostly because they wanted to learn English. And didn't really think much about it until, about whatever it was they were doing, other than learning English. So I went to this museum, and it was connected to an archaeological site. And I basically learned that Thailand had been Buddhist for hundreds of years. And this was like a 700-year-old archaeological site called Sukhothai. I believe I'm recalling it correctly. And the museum had all these examples of the way that the leadership of this kingdom related to different religions, and talked about this is a Buddhist, I forget exactly, but there was this plaque at the gate of this city, and it said, "This is a Buddhist place. This is what it means to us." I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was, "This is what it means to us. And it means you're all welcome, and it means this is a place of peace, truth, And you're all welcome to bring your truth here, but just know that people have different truths. It was just very inclusive, very peaceful, very nonviolent, clearly. And I was moved by that. It was the basis of their policy, basis of their idea of what it meant to be a good governing body. That was the first time I was moved by Buddhism. And this city had a life-size walking Buddha, really very feminine, very beautiful. With the Buddha had his hand up, like this, and was just kind of one hand at the side and one hand just walking like this. And I was struck by this life-size statue that was in this ruinous city. And when I was in Bangkok, I went and found a copy of this, that was this big. I couldn't afford a life-size one. And years later, at this point I had not realized I was a Buddhist. Just curiosity. It just wasn't, the framing of my mind was not one that was looking for some religion, really. Years later, I was having a funk. I think I was 26 at this point, years later. I was 26 years old, sitting around, just realizing that I didn't know if I really wanted all the things that I was pursuing in my life. For sure, I kind of wanted them. It wasn't real black and white, but I kind of, I had a habit of smoking marijuana pretty frequently at the time. And that just didn't seem good enough. But, for some reason, it sort of made this basic malaise go away every day. And, I'm not a super self-judgmental type person. I just wasn't raised with that. But nonetheless, there's a part of me just going, I don't know, and there was this Buddha statue on my shelf. And that moment I was like, oh yeah, then maybe I'll look into that. It was, so thank goodness the internet had just happened. Right? And really almost in retrospect, I didn't think about it until it just happened. So I went to this site. It was a pan-Buddhist site called buddhanet.net. They compiled a lot of Buddhist teachings from around the world. It was based in Taiwan. And it had a 5-minute introduction to Buddhism. It was really a well-organized site. And that's all it took. I was like, yeah, that's it. Because, it just fit at that moment for me. So I tell that story because, to me, whatever it is, whatever Buddhism is, it's not a technique. I know, I don't know how it is for all of you, but, and I'm a huge fan of John Kabat-Zinn, meditation is, paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally, right? But it's not just that. That's not just what meditation is. Meditation is also an inspired vision that connects with what is naturally your ideal. If I teach beginning Buddhism classes here a lot, and I ask people, I take a whiteboard and I just ask people, what are you drawn to? What are you drawn to being in the world? What inspires you about being in the world? What do you want to be, and what are you inspired by others when they are it? I change that question up all the time because I'm trying to elicit, and I start writing down the things that people give me. This is before I teach them anything about Buddhism. And I get compassion, and I get creativity, and I get kindness and presence, and I get an incredible list of words. It's just I've never gotten anything that wasn't a good thing to put on that board from the people I ask. And I do this time and time again. And it seems to indicate that we are that we are naturally drawn to some way of being in the world that isn't petty, and that is emotionally warm and connected and caring. Like it's just true. Like there's some way in which we are drawn to a natural ideal. So while I'm a huge fan of the techniques of mindfulness, they don't fully encapsulate what our heart is drawn towards. They do help us. But I think it's important. And I say this because when I became a Buddhist, I wasn't thinking about meditation at all. I wasn't thinking about technique at all. There was some image, and it had partly to do with this incredible piece of art that was this walking Buddha that had this look and this stance. This artist had conveyed something that I couldn't say anything about, but at that moment I was drawn to look it up, And there was a conceptual set of teachings, the Four Noble Truths, dependent arising, that all things arise and pass away and dependence upon conditions, that somehow juxtaposed with this peaceful, kind-looking walk, that made me get it intuitively. Like I made an intuitive leap in that moment. It just knew. And this is what I want to talk about today. It's this intuitive leap that isn't like understanding that a system is helpful. Do you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of Buddhist systems are quite helpful and we can understand them. Somebody tells us about mindfulness-based stress reduction, and we're like, yeah, I can get on board with that. That makes sense, right? And maybe that is your intuition connecting with your true sort of ideal. You know what I mean? Like a natural ideal. And maybe it's just you thinking you can like fix yourself and make yourself a little bit happier. And that's good too. What I would like to suggest is that we can kind of get in touch with what Buddhism as a tradition, which is thousands of years old, and connected to a lot of myths, a lot of stories, it is a system of faith. And faith is a really difficult word because, it has different meanings in different religious traditions. But I want to actually say a little bit about what that word means in the Buddhist tradition. And this is a translation from an Abhidharma text. It's a Tibetan Abhidharma text. Abhidharma are systematized lists that are derived from the Buddhist teachings. A bunch of scholars try to figure out what are all the things, what are all the mental states, which ones are good, which ones aren't good, like hatred's bad. And this is what it says about faith. It is a deep conviction, lucidity, and longing for what is real, has value, and is possible. It is a deep conviction, lucidity, and longing for what is real, has value, and is possible. This is what faith means to me. And it has three parts that are in that sentence, and this is delineated. These Abhidharma traditions, which are found in different Buddhist traditions, they're very interested in delineating all the aspects. I'm not a scholar in this. It's quite interesting to me that they do this, but they want to delineate all the aspects. So this faith has three parts, and it's in the sentence already. It is a conviction in what's real. Yeah. And of course, conviction means some connection to, some understanding of, if not full, right? And it means conviction in that understanding. Yeah. So I just want to submit that it isn't necessarily a logical conviction. It might be an intuitive leap that gives you this conviction. It might be the image of a walking Buddha that just has a serenity, that just has, in conjunction with where you found it, like I found this Buddha in this ancient site, and I had a sense walking around the grounds of this ancient site that the people lived there, and they lived by a set of sort of practices and principles that they found helpful. Whether or not that was true, maybe everybody here at the city was actually all angry all the time. That's beside the point. What's important here is that this statue and this site gave me a sense of humanity striving towards a natural ideal that really did serve them. And I had that image. And it was an intuitive leap, not a logical leap. But nonetheless, it gave me a certain conviction that it was real. Yeah. That it was a lived experience. That's what real means. It means it was a lived experience. Yeah, this isn't a philosophical real. It's a lucidity to true value. This is the second one. It's a lucidity to true value. Lucidity means that, it's rather poetic, but I just find it to be like awakeness, right? It has a continuity of awakeness to what is truly valuable. Yeah. And the third one is a longing for what is possible. And of course, a longing for what is possible might include all kinds of perceptions of what might be possible. This I find to be an interesting thing, is we're all Buddhists, and maybe we have notions of ourselves and what is possible. And maybe that changes at times, and maybe we doubt it at times. But nonetheless, I would say what's interesting about this is that doesn't mean that we don't give up on something else being possible. We can always reduce ourselves to what it is we want to do, whether it is, quit smoking marijuana or, whether it's talk nicer to our partner. All things that seem possible and then later maybe aren't as possible as we thought they were, just simply on the basis of experience. But nonetheless, we know that there is something possible, and this is, because things are happening all the time, so obviously things are possible. And I want to say that the longing for what is possible really makes a lot possible. And this is where I want to transition slightly and say that the way we conceive of things matters, and that is partly that is an important part of the Buddhist message. That the way we conceive of things matters. Yeah, and if we wake up to that, if we wake up to how much it matters, how we conceive of our lives and what's important to us, then we're kind of we can start to kind of enter into a milieu of thinking that values what's real, values what brings us into what we want, what's meaningful. And we become more and more lucid to that, right? More and more lucid to what's actually of value. And of course, we have great teachers like the Buddha and many other spiritual traditions, but a huge plethora of Buddhist teachers who are telling us that generosity is worthwhile, that kindness is worthwhile, that compassion is worthwhile, that not getting too caught up in getting stuff for ourselves is worthwhile. So we have guidelines for what is worthwhile, but we need to find it in our experience and long for it. So that is a practice, and that's, I just want to say, there is a certain amount of room in Buddhist practice to cultivate longing for what is worthwhile, to imagine what's worthwhile. And for that to be real, our imagination is real in that the way we conceive of what we want matters, and it affects us. It makes us look at the world in a way that is receptive to situations where we can be generous, where we can be compassionate, where we can be kind. And then it all relates back to John Kabat-Zinn saying, paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally. Because that's how we know what's real. And that's where it starts. We start with a conviction in what's real. So you might actually be, with more clarity, you might actually recognize how nice generosity is. How nice it is when we actually aren't craving more things that we can have, and when we aren't sort of protecting the things that we have that are getting a little bit older, and we start to understand that our body is dying every day, and that everything is changing around us. All of the Buddhist teachings, I feel like those are not the things I need to tell you all about. Like, that's what I started this talk with. I know all of you know about the Four Noble Truths. And I know you all know about paying attention and how valuable it is to sit calmly, take some time with the breath, and be gentle with the body. And it is also valuable to cultivate a sense of longing for what is kind of a natural ideal for us. That connection with friends, being generous, speaking kindly to each other. Like, we can have an image of ourselves doing that. We can also have an awareness of how valuable that is. And we can also have an awareness of how it's real. It's in experience. We really do experience the joy of generosity, the joy of kindness, the joy of receiving generosity, the joy of receiving kindness, the joy of, needing less. You know, we do need to sort of rejoice in our successes. That's a big traditional Buddhist practice, is rejoicing in merit. Yeah, so we should also have a practice of rejoicing in merit. I'm sure, we have a sort of codified one in our tradition. Let's see if I can. I rejoice with delight in the good done by all beings, through which they obtain rest at the end of suffering. I rejoice in the release of beings from the sufferings of the rounds of existence. I rejoice in the teaching and the bodhisattva who are protectors. I rejoice in the release. I rejoice in the arising of the bodhicitta and the teaching that are like oceans of benefit for all beings. So that's something we do regularly. And also, I didn't recite it exactly right because I'm a little nervous. I think I'll just stop right there. I don't know what time it is.
11:30.
11:30. So I usually go to about 11:45.
Yeah.
There was one other thing that I wanted to convey about this. Our teacher sort of mixed the our teacher was an ordained Theravada monk and learned a lot from what is called the Pali Canon, which is the Southeast Asian tradition in Sri Lanka. They have a tradition of understanding that there's this point. He mixed it in with the Mahayana, which I won't get too much into. But they had this point where your conviction in what's real, your experience of yourself in relationship to what the Buddha taught, had a turning point where it's called stream entry. This notion that you realize the truth and value of what the Buddha was teaching so directly in your experience that you're just pulled along, but you can't turn away. You are now destined for enlightenment. But in this tradition, the idea is that the first time this happens, you're only guaranteed 7 lifetimes before you get enlightened. And I love this as a story. And then it's also a formulation of like what's next. So potentially what's next is like 7 lifetimes of like working on your own greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah? And then like potentially within that 7 lifetimes, you work on it enough and loosen the bonds of your greed and hatred enough that, actually like the next lifetime is the one where you'll get enlightened. And that might happen before 7 lifetimes, but then that's just weakening. That's just weakening the greed, hatred, and delusion. That's just like becoming a bit, less dominated by it. And then this is a traditional listen, and I can't recite all of it. But then at some point, you actually sort of break the bonds of this kind of the sensuality and the things that sort of bind us to greed and hatred, such that you actually will become enlightened in this lifetime. And then you break a couple more, and then you can get enlightened. But there's this progressive idea that there are these stages. But the important thing in this thing is that there's potentially seven lifetimes of working with greed, hatred, and delusion before you get enlightened. The 3 things that you break through at this initial stage, the initial stage, is doubt and indecision. That's one of them. They all break together. One of them is that you're a fixed entity. You somehow are a fixed and eternal entity in some way, right? This is, that somehow you are just who you are, and there's some part of you that you just can't change. And then the other one is rites and rituals as practices and as having value in and of themselves. And our teacher, actually, our founding teacher, called this superficiality. That was a better translation, mostly for sort of the Western context. The idea being that in some contexts it was all about doing your rituals correctly, whereas in this context it's sort of about being superficial in your practice. Anyway, these are three things. And they all kind of break simultaneously. And I would like to suggest, just today, because that this is all something that might have already happened for a lot of us, that essentially this real conviction in what is real with relationship to our experience, and a lucidity to what has true value, and a longing for what is possible. These are the things that break through this first level of awakening. Basically means you have a heartfelt, pulled connection towards what this natural ideal that the Buddha realized is. And that's all we need, really, to have 7 lifetimes before we're a perfect Buddha. I wanted to say that, just as an idea, as a myth that we can all possibly relate to, just by being inspired by the Buddha enough. That's all. Just by being inspired by the Buddha enough, by making an intuitive leap that there's real value there, and letting that intuitive leap feed our heart regularly. And that's what, I have this mala around my neck. That's what I'm doing. I'm reminding myself every bead to make that intuitive leap again and again and again, to habituate my heart to the Buddha's heart as a natural ideal. Yeah. So I'll stop there. Where am I at now?
We've got lots of time for Q&A.
Yeah.
Well, I try to wait until other people speak because I talk a lot. But I really appreciate the Dharma definition. Those three things really mean a lot. And I was really glad to hear the longing part, because I'm also attracted to a devotional or bhakti yoga path. And even in Buddhism, there's the 2 wings of Dharma. The wisdom and compassion. But the longing, as really put it, is what does the work. The longing is our salvation. And I used to see it as like a suffering. The longing means separate from, and it's part of the thing itself, if you can say that. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Pali it's Dhammachanda. It's the desire for Dhamma.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much for that talk. It's one of the first times I've started taking notes at a spiritual discourse. Usually just try and let it absorb. But there was a lot of lucidity in your talk. But I was just wondering how you, in terms of thinking about that progression, it's so easy to slip into the idea that it's a linear kind of goal-focused path. And what do you do with that? Because I don't think that's what you're saying. When you jump into a stream, you get carried along by the stream. And there's rocks and rapids and whatever, and then you get to the ocean. But so that was more my image of a non-kind of linear goal-focused path. And then kind of being led by the longing and those other, the conviction and the intuitive leap and all those things that you were talking about. But I just wondered about that part of self that gets attached to goals.
Yeah, thank you. Because I'm sure we're all aware that there's a really important part of practice, which is knowing that we aren't our thoughts about what we're doing. And I think that it has to do with trusting. At some level, we have to have a direct experience of the good in our experience, like a direct experience of what it feels like, either to have somebody clearly acknowledge us with kindness, or to really know what that means when we clearly acknowledge somebody else with kindness, and have in that moment a realization of trusting experience in that rather than a notion of it, like an idea. All of our notions are linear, like the way we parse the world is linear, but not necessarily the way. That's not necessarily the way our experience is. And therein lies kind of meditation sometimes, is like that it isn't, things aren't necessarily linear, and weirdly enough, we can experience ourselves both as failing and succeeding simultaneously. And I'm not sure what else to say other than we start to trust experience as having value intrinsically. And I'm sure, this is something a lot of, good meditation teachers teach, that there's a way of intrinsically just trusting that experience is valuable, and that in that there's a success to be with ourselves, sort of, and not be trying to think of how we're going to fix ourselves later. And that's hard to talk about, but there's something in it. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Cass. Thanks for a really lucid talk. So it seems, if I got this right, that one of the aspects of that carry us forward into the next 7 lifetimes is sort of a faith in that there is a self, that some version of ourself moves forward through these 7 lifetimes. Can you talk about or address that in terms of the Buddhist notion of self? And
I can try. It's not quite what I was saying.
Okay.
The myth is this thing about 7 lifetimes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's a story. I don't know how much stock I put in the myth, or even the self that moves through 7 lifetimes. It's a cool story,
Right.
and I feel like there's more meaning in it that's actually about now than whether or not what those 7 lifetimes look like. To me, it's more about a way of being aware that that there is a transformative kind of conviction that makes an intuitive leap about the nature of this experience that is pivotal, right? So what the other stuff is just part of the myth, but that it's pivotal and changes our trajectory. Does that make sense? That's the most important part for me in the story. Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, a couple things I want to say. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Sometimes I wonder how firmly grounded I am, which means, and I can take comfort to the extent I imagine that I'm firmly grounded. That's kind of, sometimes I have a question that relative to the Buddhist principles, I feel, because it's quite clear to me I'm not often living that. However, the lucidity and the longing, I'm definitely clear on what they are, and I want, and so that was really, that helped me feel much more grounded in the reality that these Buddhist principles have to me, just because, even though I don't feel I'm like actually living it moment to moment, which is kind of disappointing. The lucidity and the longing is, I'm working it, and then so I like that. I also like the distinction that you drew between, this is like an intuitive thing, because this whole thing about, well, am I there, am I not there? That's totally a linear evaluation of like, but intuitively, it's more real. So, all that is meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was meaningful to somebody else. But I also appreciate having watched you, known you for several years, to see you sitting up there, and you incredibly grounded, and you actually seem to, that Buddhist principles seem to emanate from you to a certain extent with a good deal of clarity. I'm just commenting on it. It's real nice to see.
Thank you, Mike.
You
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any notion of worship in Buddhism?
Yes. Worship is kind of laced throughout our pujas, and it isn't it doesn't necessarily have exactly the same connotation as maybe somebody might associate with worship. I'm not sure, but it's definitely there. Yeah. In our ritual practices. Yeah. And just to be clear, worship is a expression that expresses the faith, that is the conviction in what is real, that the Buddha really was not deluded about the value of what he realized. Does that make sense? That is what we worship. And we worship it because it has value, that we're clear about the value that we were relating to, right? And that we long for it. That is worship. Worship is the same as those three principles of faith. Yeah, that's the way I understand worship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Prasadachitta, it seems like community is of particular value to you in your life and your practice.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts about the value of community to our practice as individuals?
Yes.
Could you share some?
Yes. So I do think that what it is that is the natural ideal is this notion that we are living in communion. We're living in communion whether we live in communion and perpetuate suffering in that communion or not. And so this ideal with the diminishing of suffering, which is the goal. The Buddha taught suffering and the cessation of suffering. This is like when he felt like people were making it too complicated, he was just like, look, I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering, and then walked away, It's like, don't complicate it. And we are the ones who suffer together in a community, and we learn about each other's suffering, and we listen to each other. And we also look for the cessation of suffering, the arising of joy, the arising of freedom, of light hearts, of like forgiveness, and the various things that can knit a community together and shine, right? Like I see that happening in my community. I also see lots of suffering and difficulty, and that is the ground we practice this in. This isn't just something we do on our own. We aren't isolated. We see the suffering by being in relationship with each other. We might see it by being alone as well, but we're never really alone. The world is interconnected. And so community, it is largely about community that we really understand and find release. Yeah, whether or not we go on solitary retreat, or not. Like, I bring my whole community with me when I go on solitary. I can feel them with me, for better and for worse. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And are there any announcements? Or what are the announcements, I should say? Yes,
I
Richard,
just want to
please.
remind people we have an encounter community Thursday, 17th in Valencia. If you have things that no longer serve you, it's a great way to support the sangha.
I'd like to just remind everyone that we have volunteer opportunities for Zoom techs or Zoom Hildas, we like to call them, and hosts who bring the prasad, the goodies on Sundays. Yeah.
And today I am the host, so please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the sangha. There's hot water for tea if you have some tea. Leave your cup in the sink and I'll take care of it at the end of the social period. There's some vegan treats, so enjoy those. I'll be circulating with the Dawn bowl. Your generosity allows us to pay rent on this wonderful space, to offer dana in turn to our speakers, to pay for the newsletter that goes largely to incarcerated individuals, but spreads the word, spreads the dharma out into the world. And so $10 to $20 would be most welcome. Anything that you care to give is greatly appreciated.
Thomas, online, do you want to talk about the podcast?
Yeah, I can just say a word. It's in the works. We're getting ready to launch that in January. All of our past talks will be put up so that you can stream them on your favorite app readily from your phone. There's definitely a volunteer opportunity there if someone would like to help. I think primarily what we need help with is some of our talks, way back in history, don't have a title on what they're about. So if you want to just listen to that and give a title to some of them, it's a great opportunity there. And then also, we have a lot of speaker bios that reside in the old newsletters archive on the website. And those need to be copy and pasted into a database we have so that, when people peruse the podcast, they'll have a sense of who's talking and what they're talking about and why they would want to click on that episode. So if you can help, please email me. I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you. I'm in the directory too.
Thank you. Any other announcements? All right. Next week, our teacher will be Jetson Zerdan Punrao, and he is an American Kadampa Buddhist monk. Sorry for my pronunciation. Zerdan has been ordained for 17 years and is practicing Buddhist for more than 22 years. He was ordained in Ulverston, England by Gopa monk Geshe Kelsang, I can't even pronounce it, Rinpoche. He began his ordained life by helping create Buddhist temple by teaching meditation and Buddha Dharma in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Zerdan now lives a humble life in Eugene, Oregon, keeping his vows, remaining a vegan and minimalist lifestyle, and sharing a warm and gentle heart and joyful attitude. So tune in next week or come next week for that. Or you can look at gaybuddhist.org for his bio. Do you have a dedication merit that you would like to use, or shall we use ours?
I could do dedication.
All right.
If you're interested. May the merit gained in our acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings, our personalities throughout our existences, our possessions, and our merits in all three ways we give up without regard to ourselves for the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space, so may we become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace.
Mike, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.